Hey guys, today on JD Cars we're going to be installing new brake rotors, pads, and wear sensors front and rear on this BMW E90. Now, before we get started with this project, I'd like to give a huge thank you to Bavarian Autosport for sponsoring this project. BAVauto is currently the world's leading parts and accessories dealer for BMWs, and they quite literally have every part you could need for your BMW. So definitely check them out at BAVauto.com. So here are all the parts that you'll need for this job. You'll need a new set of brake rotors. Today we'll be installing Bavarian Autosport's drilled and slotted ultimate brake rotor sets to improve our braking. We'll be installing cool carbon brake pads front and rear. You'll also need new brake wear sensors front and rear, 4 new brake rotor retaining bolts, some brake caliper anti-seize grease. I also highly recommend picking up some noise-free to make sure your brakes do not squeak after you complete your job. So let's get the car up on the jack stands and we'll get going. Now, to jack up the car, we'll be using this custom built 31-inch high lift jack, which I built myself. So if you want to see how to build one of your own, I'll be releasing a video next week on how you can build your own. So be sure to be on the lookout for that. I'm really happy with how this jack works. I built it for under $100, so definitely check out that video coming soon if you're interested in more. So we'll start off with our front rotors and pads, so obviously use your 17mm to remove your wheel bolts. Now the first step here is removing the Caliper retaining clip with a flathead screwdriver or pry tool. Now, using a small flathead screwdriver, you're going to need to pop off a few caps. The top cap is located right next to the bleeder screw, right here. As you can see, you just pop it off. So now we're going to be removing our guide bolts, and if you don't have the right hex bit, you can get away with using a T45 Torx bit. Just put an extension on so I can more easily access it. All of the bolts on your brake assembly can be pretty stubborn, so just be persistent with them. Now we'll remove the bottom one with the same T45 Torx bit. Once you have them loosened up with the ratchet, you can just take the bit and put it in there by hand. So once you've got the end of that guide bolt to stick out, you can pull it the rest of the way out and set it aside for later. Once you've removed the top and bottom guide bolts, you can then use a flathead to work caliper off of the caliper mounting bracket. At this point, your caliper is now free. You can pull off the old pads, and don't let this dangle by the brake line. You do want to grab a bungee cord or something to support it. Now we're going to be removing the mounting bracket bolts, which are a little bit difficult to see. Here's the top one. In the front here, it's an 18mm. In the rear, it's a 16. And you can now remove the caliper mounting bracket. Now, if you have wheel spacers like me, you're gonna have to remove them to access the retaining bolt for the rotor. 9 times out of 10, your spacers are gonna be nice and corroded on here. Mine are quite fused to the rotor. Luckily, I have an air compressor and an air hammer. This is one of my favorite tools to use for this job. It'll pop the spacer right off. Once you remove this retaining bolt with a 6mm hex drive, you can then remove the rotor. Usually you'll have to use a mallet or sledgehammer and bang on either side of the disc to get it off, as they're usually corroded on there. Before you install your new rotor, it's a good idea to take a wire brush and get rid of any of the corrosion or rust that's on here before installing the new rotor. Now, just to prevent corrosion and save the next guy some time, I'm going to apply some brake grease. Now we can install these beautiful new Ultimate Rotors from Bavarian Autosport. Line up your retaining bolt hole on the hub and install it like so. hand thread in the retaining bolt. When tightening this down, don't go too crazy. It doesn't have to be too tight, and your new rotor is now installed. So now I'll be installing cool carbon brake pads. I'm installing these front and rear, but before we install these, it's a good idea to clean off your caliper and your caliper mounting bracket with a wire brush and a flathead screwdriver, just to remove the debris from all the brake dust. Also important before installing your new brake pads is applying some noise free to the back of your pads to eliminate any squeaking from your brakes. Thoroughly stir this up and apply it to the back of the pads, and then you'll want to wait about 20 minutes for it to tack up. While you're waiting for the noise free to dry on your pads, you can grab yourself a nice big C-clamp and compress the piston on the caliper. While our noise free is drying on the back of the pads, we can reinstall our mounting bracket so we can get the caliper reinstalled. Once you have the bracket reinstalled, you can remove the bungee cord from your caliper, and we can now install our new pads. Be careful not to get the noise free on the rotor or the contact point of the pad. Now we're going to be reinstalling our guide bolts, but before we do so, it's a good idea to clean them off with a wire brush. Also a good idea to apply some grease to your guide bolts before reinstalling them, as the caliper slides across the guide bolts. Now come in from behind, reinstall the guide bolt. Now take your bit in your hand, come in from the back, get it into your guide bolt, and you can move the caliper around as necessary to get the guide bolt seated into its threads. And of course, remember to tighten this down with your ratchet. And of course, remember to reinstall your retaining clip. It's easiest if you get the two inner parts in and pull the outer arms out and around. And last but not least, don't forget to reinstall your guide bolt caps on the back of the caliper. And now we've got our new rotor installed, as well as the new cool carbon pads. Now when you're doing the left side, you are going to have to replace a brake wear sensor. The front left and the rear right of the car both have sensors to tell you when the brake pad has worn down. This little wire hanging down here is your front wear sensor. If you follow the wire back, you can see it traces back to this little plastic box here, and your brake sensor is the white connector, so you can pull that out and disconnect it. Then simply remove the wire from all the points that it's secured and replace the sensor with a new one when you reinstall the pads. So I'll demonstrate on the front pad here how to install your new sensor. So pull your sensor through the caliper, and before you install the pad, you want to take the sensor and secure it right here on the pad. Make sure it's nice and snug and it's not going to fall off, and then you can proceed with installing the pad. Now the removal and installation process in the rear is identical to the front, with the exception of the fact that you'll be using a 16mm socket to remove your mounting screws instead of the 18 in the front. And your rear wear sensor is located in the rear here. There are 3 retaining clips that which you're going to use a little flathead screwdriver to release. Pop them open and remove the sensor wire. Then you'll need to remove a 10mm nut right here, and an 8mm screw located right here under the trunk. This will allow you to pull back the fender liner, which, as you can see, reveals the connector for your brake wear sensor. So just as we did in the front, we grab our caliper, feed the sensor, pull through as much of the excess cable as you can, install the sensor on the pad, and then finally install the pad into the caliper. Grab the caliper and slide it over. Now I just have to reinstall the guide bolts, guide bolt caps, and the caliper spring. At this point, you should be done with the installation of your new rotors and pads. That concludes this video. I did collect some data before installing these new rotors and pads, so I'll be performing the identical test, comparing the data, and I'll be sharing the performance results with you guys next week. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Again, a huge thank you to BAVauto for sending me their ultimate brake rotors and other necessary materials for this job. Be sure to check them out at BAVauto.com. Please leave a like below and subscribe if you've yet to do so, and I'll see you next time on JD Cars.